Hands closed around her throat from behind in the locker room, and she did not scream. I saw it happen. I was 2 rows over, seated on the bench tying my left boot, when the sound of boots on concrete went wrong, too many feet moving too fast, and then a specific silence that follows a sudden grab. I came around the end of the lockers and I saw them. 2 soldiers, both larger than her by a significant margin, one with both hands at her neck from behind and the other blocking the aisle with his arm extended. The man in front was leaning slightly forward, watching, like he was waiting to see whether she would try to go that direction. She had already stopped going anywhere. What happened in the next 4 seconds I am going to describe as plainly as I can, because it happened faster than I could follow in real time, and I have only understood the sequence from turning it over in my memory many times since. She did not claw at the hands on her throat. She did not pitch forward or kick back. She brought both elbows in close to her body, then drove them outward simultaneously in a motion that was controlled and complete, a specific technique, not a panic response, and the geometry of it removed the leverage the man behind her had been using. In the same motion she stepped back into him, hard, driving her full weight into his center of balance, and his stumble gave her the half-turn she needed. And in one continuous movement the man who had been gripping her throat was suddenly facing her instead of her back off balance, with her right forearm across his chest at the sternum. The man in front tried to close the distance. She turned her hips slightly, kept her forearm exactly where it was, and the angle of her stance opened a problem for the second man. Any direction he moved put him further off balance. He stopped. She stood there, her forearm against the first man's chest, the second man 1 step away from her, and her breathing was measured, not labored. Measured the way someone controls their breathing who has trained that control until it is automatic. She said in a clear and entirely level voice, "Take your hands off me and step back." The first man stepped back, his face had changed. The second man stepped back, his had too. She did not strike either of them. She did not use the leverage she had to put the first man on the ground, which she could have done. She stepped away, put her back against the locker wall so no one could approach from behind, and she looked at both of them for a moment. She said, "Go get the duty NCO." I went. That was the only thing I could think to do. My name is Private First Class Theo Garris, and at the time of these events I had been at Caldwell Training Command for 6 months. 6 months is long enough to understand that what I witnessed was not a normal event, and not long enough to understand the full weight of it. That understanding came over the following 72 hours, and it changed how I think about a number of things I had previously not thought about carefully enough. The woman in the locker room was Chief Warrant Officer 5 Renata Strand, call sign Bedrock, and at the time 2 soldiers tried to choke her. She had 20 years and 4 months of continuous active service as a Navy SEAL. That made her the longest-serving active female operator in the recorded history of that community, and the holder of a combat deployment record that I later received access to only in summary form. The summary used the word extensive in the way that military summaries use that word when the actual number would require context to be properly understood. None of that was visible on her when she came to Caldwell Training Command. That was entirely deliberate. She had arrived 3 weeks before the incident as part of a training evaluation detail, an assessment team sent to observe and report on the command's land warfare integration curriculum. Evaluation teams are typically quiet about their purpose because the value of an assessment decreases sharply when the subjects know they are being assessed. She had been present in classrooms, on ranges, and in field exercises. She wore the standard evaluator identification badge, which is a subdued thing that says little. Her uniform carried a name tape and a rank insignia, and nothing beyond that. No deployment patches, no qualification badges, no indication of what was behind the name or behind the rank. She had sat in the back of my platoon's land navigation class 2 weeks earlier. I noticed her because she was the only person in the room clearly past 40, and because she listened to the instructor with the focused attention of someone who already knows the material and is listening for something else, a gap in the sequence, a flaw in the framing, a thing the instructor has not noticed. She did not say anything during the class. She wrote notes in a small notebook and left when it ended. I saw her twice more before the incident. Once on the range, standing at the berm during our marksmanship qualification, watching the shooters and writing in that same small notebook. The range safety officer spoke to her once, and she answered briefly and went back to observing. Once in the dining facility, sitting alone with a tray, reading a binder of printed documents. She did not appear to be looking for conversation, and no one offered it. The picture I had formed of her was of a quiet professional doing a quiet job in a quiet way. 3 observations, none of them remarkable. That was the extent of what I knew about her when I came around the end of the lockers. 2 soldiers in my unit, Specialist Cordell Prout and Specialist Damon Hughes, had apparently spent 3 weeks forming a conclusion about the evaluator woman that turned out to be wrong in every material way. I do not know the full content of what they said to each other during that time. I know that Prout had made a remark in the barracks 2 nights before the incident, which Corporal Landau later reported to the investigating officer, to the effect that the evaluator was moving through the training command as though she owned it, and that someone ought to remind her of what she actually was. Landau told him to leave it alone. Prout did not leave it alone. What their reasoning was for moving from a remark in the barracks to 2 men cornering a lone woman in a locker room, I am not able to fully explain. I think it was a combination of arrogance about their own physical size, a habit of measuring people by the visible markers of military status, and a deep underestimation of someone who had given them no visible reason to understand her correctly. She wore no combat patches. She carried no visible decoration. She had said nothing memorable in 3 weeks of being present, and silence, in some men's accounting, reads as absence. They looked at her and saw nothing remarkable, and they were as wrong about that as it is possible to be. What I know is that what they found in the locker room was not what they had expected. After I retrieved Sergeant First Class Acaffer, the duty NCO, we returned to find the locker room in the same configuration I had left. Strand was standing against the wall with her arms crossed. Her breathing was normal. Prout and Hughes were standing a measured distance from her, with the particular stillness that men have when they have lost control of a situation and do not yet know how large the consequences are going to be. Acaffer assessed the room in about 2 seconds. He is the kind of NCO who has processed enough hard situations that he can read the shape of a new one quickly. He looked at me and asked what I had seen. I told him, in the sequence it happened. He listened without interrupting. He told Prout and Hughes to stand fast, and then he moved to Strand and asked if she was injured. She said no. He asked if she needed anything. She said, "I need to give you a statement." He took it. She gave it briefly and without ornamentation, location, timeline, what each man did, what she did in response, what she said, what they did after. Acaffer wrote it in his duty book as she spoke, asking no clarifying questions, which told me he had understood the account the first time through. Then he made 2 phone calls. The first was to the military police duty officer. The second was to a number he had to look up in a separate notebook rather than his standard duty contact list. He made that call in the hallway outside the locker room, and when he came back in his face, had changed the way faces change when a situation has revealed itself to be larger than it appeared from the outside. I learned later that the second call was to the senior element of the evaluation team. Strand was attached to. I learned what that element was approximately 36 hours after the incident, when the formal record reading made it unmistakable. The investigating officer was a lieutenant colonel who arrived 39 minutes after the calls. Upon reviewing the identification Strand presented, he went still for a moment, the kind of still that happens when a document is not what you were expecting. He reread something on the page, then looked up at her with an expression I recognized as recalibration. I gave a formal statement that covered everything I had seen in order. The MP interviewer asked me twice specifically about the self-defense sequence, and I told him both times with the same words. She broke the grip by removing the leverage with her elbows, used the stumble to reposition herself, took a controlling stance with her forearm across the first man's sternum, and said to step back. She did not strike either man. She did not pursue when they stepped away. She created distance and directed me to get the NCO. The interviewer wrote all of it down. He did not appear surprised by what I described. Over the following 2 days, I watched the effects of Akafer's second phone call move through the command structure at a pace that was faster than anything else I had seen at Caldwell. The first sergeant came to find me the next morning and asked again for my account, taking his own notes this time. The company commander requested the MP report by mid-morning and was carrying it when I saw him cross the parade field at noon. The training command's senior NCO, a sergeant major who had been at Caldwell for 8 years, and who I had never personally spoken to, walked through our company area in the early afternoon, his expression not one I would describe as routine. I had the sense during those 2 days of a stone dropped in still water. The rings moved outward from the locker room in every direction simultaneously, and everywhere they reached something changed: posture, expression, the cadence of conversations in rooms that went quiet when I walked by. Prout and Hughes were confined to their barracks rooms. Nobody in the unit seemed to know exactly who Strand was, but everyone could read the signs of something larger than an ordinary incident, and so everyone was quiet in the way soldiers are quiet when they understand they are standing near something that has not finished yet. On the second day after the incident, the lieutenant colonel convened a formal session in Caldwell's main classroom building. Prout and Hughes were present with their legal representative. The unit chain of command was present in its entirety. I was not in that room, but Corporal Landau was present as a witness to the barracks remark, and he told me afterward what occurred. The lieutenant colonel read into the record, with Strand's authorization, a summarized version of her service record. He read it without commentary. It covered 20 years of deployments across operational environments listed by theater and region rather than specific name. It covered a valor citation from year 7 of her service. It covered the combat missions she had participated in, expressed as a range for classification reasons. It covered her qualifications in a number of specialized disciplines listed by category. Not detailed. Landau said the company commander straightened in his chair when those were read aloud, and did not relax again for the rest of the session. It covered, finally, the designation the Navy bestows on operators who have served at the highest functional level of the SEAL community for a sufficient sustained period to be recognized as an institutional asset. That designation is genuinely rare and carries a specific weight among people who understand what it means. When the lieutenant colonel read it aloud, Landau said, the room went quiet, not the ordinary quiet of a formal session. The kind of quiet that falls when everyone in a room is simultaneously revising something they had considered settled. Prout and Hughes were removed from the training command. The outcomes that followed for them professionally are not mine to detail, but I know they were significant and appropriately so. Landau came out of that session looking as though he had just heard something he would carry for a long time. He found me outside and did not say much. He said, I understand what I saw in the barracks now and why I should have done more when I heard it. He said he was going to think about that for a while. I told him he had reported it. He said not fast enough. I did not disagree. What I can tell you is what I witnessed in the hallway outside the classroom building when the session concluded. Strand came out first. She wore the same subdued evaluator badge, the same unremarkable uniform. She walked toward the parking lot at a normal pace. The lieutenant colonel came out behind her and called her name. She stopped and turned. He came to attention in the middle of the Caldwell Training Command hallway, in front of the company commander, and the first sergeant and Corporal Landau, and the 3 other soldiers who were standing along that hallway trying not to appear to be watching. He rendered a full salute to Chief Warrant Officer 5 Renata Strand. He held it. She returned the salute with the precision of someone who has performed it 10,000 times and understands that it is a form of language, and that when it is done correctly and is owed and is given without any instruction being needed, it says exactly what it is meant to say. She held his eyes for a moment, then she turned and walked to the parking lot. The afternoon after the session, I happened to be in the admin building when Strand came through to collect her evaluation documentation from the command clerk. She signed the receipt for her materials and turned to go. The clerk, a specialist named Wren who had been at Caldwell for 2 years and who I knew to be a careful and observant person, said quietly, "Chief Warrant Officer." Strand stopped and looked back. Wren came to attention at her desk. She was not required to. There was no regulation that mandated it. She stood up from her chair and she stood at attention because she had been present in the outer office during enough of the previous 2 days to understand something about the person she was looking at. Strand looked at her for a moment. She nodded once, then she walked out. I stood in the doorway. Wren sat back down and went back to her keyboard. She did not look up. I thought about that for the rest of the day. The enlisted specialist who stood at attention without being told to, without anyone watching but me, because the thing she had witnessed over 2 days had changed how she understood what was standing in front of her. That is what genuine competence does when it becomes visible. It does not require witnesses. It does not require ceremony. When the record is undeniable, the response finds its own form. I have thought about that moment many times in the years since. I was 22 years old and I was watching, and what I saw across those 72 hours was a person who had more reason for anger than most people accumulate in a lifetime, and who was not angry. Not in the locker room when men had their hands on her. Not in the hallway giving her statement. Not in the parking lot after the record had been read aloud in a silent room, and the size of what had been done to her had become clear to everyone in it. She moved through all of it with the same quality, directed, clear, entirely unperformed. She did not tell anyone who she was. She never told anyone who she was. The record said it. The formal session said it. The lieutenant colonel standing at attention in the hallway said it. She had been doing the job she was sent to Caldwell to do, and 2 men had decided that made her something they could manage. And they had been wrong in a way that 20 years of documented record made impossible to argue with. I think about the locker room when I am trying to hold my own standard in a hard place. I think about what it looks like to take a grip off your throat, step back from the men who put it there, and wait quietly for what is right to arrive through the proper channel. The technique she used in those 4 seconds is one thing. The composure behind it, built over 2 decades until composure was simply what she was, is another thing entirely. She already had both. She had walked into that training command with both, and she walked out with both, and the hallway salute was the only thing that changed from the day she arrived to the day she left. Because it was the only honest response the situation had left available. I have tried to be the kind of soldier who earns that quality of response someday. I have not always succeeded. I keep working at it.